May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated, everyone. This must be a good sermon because both Alana and Sarah are coming back to hear it a second time, so it's got to be fantastic. So, our gospel reading today may seem a little out of place for Christmas service. We're probably used to the Gospels from Matthew and Luke of unwed mothers, kind of like Greensleeves that we just sang. We have unwed mothers, troubled fathers, of visions and dreams, of no room in the inn, of babies in mangers surrounded by animals, of shepherds and angels, of wise men bringing gifts, of peace on earth and goodwill to all people. Instead, our gospel reading today was the prologue of John's gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the light was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. We may have come here hoping for the sentimental coziness of the Hallmark Channel, and instead we get a metaphysical documentary on the Discovery Channel. We get John, who wrote this eyewitness account of the life of Jesus, giving us a discourse on the basic structure of reality. Personally, after having watched and actually fallen asleep through one too many cheesy Christmas movies over the last little while, I have to say, hands down, I prefer to watch a good documentary. Because you don't just get into what happened, or because you don't just get into what happened, you get not only why it happens, but how it works. And this, for me at least, makes even the most mundane topics like aluminum recycling somewhat exciting. John, in writing the prologue part of his gospel, gets to the nuts and bolts of the human condition. And he gets also into the basic nature of reality. And this is important because if we don't get this right, we don't get everything else right. Nothing else will fall into place properly. So John starts by writing, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So let's just stop right there. What is John talking about? What is this Word that John is talking about? Well, the word translated "word" with a capital W in the scriptures is the word logos in Greek, the language that John's gospel was originally written in. And logos in Greek has many different meanings. At the most basic level, it means simply a word, an utterance, or the act of speaking. But in early non-literary societies, the dependability of the words that were spoken was immeasurable, especially when there were no such things as receipts, agreements, records. As an exercise, try returning a gift that you've bought from the mall after Christmas without a receipt and simply go in and say, "Oh, I bought it here." Do you think sometimes that will work if they know you, but most of the time it won't. No receipt, your word means nothing. No receipt means no exchange or getting your money back. But in non-literary societies, your word was your bond. And the word logos came to be associated with not only what was said, but with the personal integrity of the person who said it, the trustworthiness of the person making that utterance. And over time, it not only represented what was spoken, but what was spoken is an expression of the inner thought of the person who spoke it, the rational inner thought behind the words that were spoken. And for Greek philosophers, when they looked at the order and the rationality of the material universe, they developed a philosophical concept of the logos, the rational, stabilizing, supreme principle of the universe, the eternal reason, you could say. Some might say even the soul of the universe. Hands up for thinking this is a pretty heavy concept. Well, it's going to get worse. The Logos was not God as we or many people might conceive it today, because most of the Greek gods were kind of just worried about themselves. They were detached from the world. They were just worried about their petty egos, their needs, and their desires. They had little regard for the cares and concerns of people. The Greeks, especially the philosophers, saw the Logos as sort of an impersonal force that originated, permeated, and directed all things. Do we have any Star Wars nerds out there? What does that sound like? It kind of sounds like the Force in Star Wars. And actually, there's a derivative of this that still exists today. It's the intelligent design movement. It's not really a god, but there has to be some sort of a designer that's sort of nebulous. So this thought, this concept of the Greek concept of the Logos is actually still with us, just wears different clothing. And then when the Old Testament was translated from the original Hebrew into Greek, Logos was used to translate the Hebrew word devar, which means a meaningful sound. And at its root, the root of that word is actually says that which lies behind. So in reality, it was the same basic kind of concept that the Greeks were talking about. But because the Hebrews believed in an omniscient, omnipotent, holy, righteous, and just, and transcendent God who created the universe, who literally spoke the whole of creation into existence, Logos in Jewish thought did not mean the literal words or speech of God. It referred to the dynamic and active communication of God's purpose and plan to his people in light of creation. Logos began to be understood as the creative power of God by which his will was brought into effect into the world. People began to see similarities between the Logos and the wisdom of God. Indeed, in the Bible, wisdom is personified as a literary device, as Sophia, the creative wisdom of God. It's like someone who gives freedom or bravery a persona in a poem or a hymn, or in our psalm where the fields clap their hands. Fields don't clap their hands, but it's a literary device. Listen to these words from Proverbs 8 about wisdom. This is Proverbs 8, 22-31. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth, and when there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills I was brought forth, before he has made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there, when he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was beside him like a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the children of men. Indeed, for Philo, a Jewish philosopher from around the time of Jesus, who sought to harmonize Greek philosophy and Jewish thought, the Logos in Greek thought was identified with Sophia, the wisdom of God. But Philo, also saw parallels with other Old Testament descriptions, such as the angel of the Lord, the name of God. He thought of wisdom, the Logos, as almost a second God, or an aspect or a manifestation of God himself. You can see how Jewish thought was pregnant for the coming of the Messiah. So what John is doing here in John 1, he's actually engaging both Greek and Hebrew concepts of the Logos, the two main philosophies of John's world, the sum of worldly wisdom in his time. And he was generating something profoundly new. Using the language of Genesis 1, in the beginning, something Jews of the time would have picked up on. He affirms that the word, the Logos, existed before time, before the beginning. The Logos is eternal. And then he draws in Greek ideas of the Logos that brought the world into existence and continues to sustain it. And he says this word, this Logos, is actually God. He's not some abstract, impersonal force. But bringing those two together and then bouncing that off of Jewish conceptions of Sophia, He says he's more than that. He's God and he's man. He's not just a literary device. He's actually a person, and not just in the abstract. He is a him who is both God and man, who made absolutely everything, no exceptions. And then he says in verse 4, the Logos, the Word, is the source of all life. But not just life. He brings understanding. He brings light, just like you would expect wisdom to do. A light so bright that the darkness cannot stop it. Understanding so profound that it surpasses all human understanding. John is saying to both Greeks and Jews, what you're both looking for is both God and man. The eternal reason of the cosmos, the world, for everything is the God-man, Jesus of Nazareth. Not only that, he is the way that God conclusively communicates with us, how he tells us his good and perfect will for us and for all creation. If we want to see what Jesus is like, look to Jesus, the Word. If we want to see what God is like, look to Jesus, the Word made flesh. What has been hidden is now revealed. But if we look at verse 10, John tells us of a great contradiction. The Word, Jesus, came to that which was his own, but nobody recognized him, even his own people, those who you would expect to most likely recognize him. They had the scriptures, they had all the prophecies, and they missed them. Our fallen human nature, and nothing has changed in this, is such that we can't see past ourselves, and the only thing that we can offer God, the eternal reason for the universe, is our disdain, our skepticism, and our rejection. But look at the promise to those who do recognize him in verse 12. He adopts them into his own family forever. Doesn't matter who your parents are, what family you were born to, how much wealth or status you have, how smart or good looking you are, what you have or haven't done, how messed up you or your family is. To all who receive him, they are given an amazing gift, the right to become the children of God. Here the Bible uses a peculiar phrase, those who believe in his name. To believe in someone's name is just not name dropping, like, kind of trying to get into a club or something. And I had everybody laughing last night because I said it's not like I go to many clubs, but it's like going to a club and skipping the line because you go up to the bouncer and say, hey, I'm good friends with so-and-so inside. To believe in someone's name in ancient times meant to believe in the whole person, in everything that they represent and that they stand for. Theologian Leon Morris explains it this way: to believe in the name of the Word then means to trust in the person of the Word. It is to believe in him as he is. It is to believe that God is the God revealed in the Word and to put our trust in that God. It's not believing that what he says is true, but trusting in a person. It is believing in or on him. My friends, simply believing in the name of someone, trusting them as a person, and on the basis of this only being accepted as a son or daughter, is an amazing gift. It's the gift of unmerited favor. We don't deserve it, but we get it anyway. Friends, this is what the Bible calls grace. Many of you will remember the story of Captain Tom Moore. Does anybody recognize that name? You will in a minute. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Captain Tom, a 99-year-old British World War II veteran, set out to walk 100 laps around his garden to raise money for the National Health Service, which was going through quite a financial crunch at that time. He was trying to raise money for the National Health Service in the UK. And his original goal was modest. He hoped to raise £1,000 by his 100th birthday. And you would see pictures of him on the news where he was at his little walker, and he was, gray trousers, gray flannels, a blue suit jacket, his beret on, wearing his medals, and he would be walking around his little garden. But as news of his efforts spread, people from all over the world were inspired by his determination and by his kindness. Donations poured in, eventually exceeding £33 million. Captain Tom received more than financial support for the NHS. By the time he completed his lapse, he'd become a national hero. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II, and he received countless letters and gifts. He was celebrated worldwide. But reflecting on his journey, Captain Tom often expressed his gratitude, saying that he never expected or deserved such recognition. All he had done was walk in his garden, a simple act that touched the hearts of millions of people. Blessings can come in unexpected and overwhelming ways. Like Captain Tom, we may feel unworthy of such gifts, yet just as he inspired the world, God's grace often comes to us unexpectedly, not because we've earned it, but because of his love and his mercy. As Paul writes in his second letter to the Corinthians, thanks be to God for his undescribable gift. And then carrying on through our reading in verse 14, where we are told that the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. The sense of the original Greek is not just that he became a man. It means that he took on human nature in its entirety and lived among us. The eternal Word, the reason for and behind everything, stepped out of eternity into time and lived on earth as a human, fully human in nature. Now, the word dwelling in the original language literally means to pitch one's tent. And for Jewish ears, this would evoke stories of the Exodus, when God freed the Hebrews from slavery in Egypt, of the wanderings in the desert for 40 years, of the tabernacle, the tent that served as a portable temple for the wandering Israelites. It would also evoke a remembrance of what the temple represented, the home of God's glory, his Shekinah glory, his personal presence with his people, which took the form of either of a cloud in the tabernacle and later the temple. But remember, for Jews of the time of Jesus, the Shekinah glory had left the temple 500 years earlier, and it had never been seen to return. What John is saying here is that in Jesus, we have seen the glory of God, his Shekinah glory in all of its fullness. The personal presence of God amongst his people had returned, but this time not in a cloud or a pillar of fire, this time in the flesh, this time as Jesus of Nazareth. This is the story that is behind the other Christmas stories. This is the essence of the Christmas message. Friends, I think we all agree that we live in challenging and chaotic times. It's easy for life to seem empty and without purpose at times. I'm reminded of the story I once heard of a biology teacher sitting in the staff lounge at school during lunchtime, and he was in conversation with one of his fellow teachers. And he commented on how many of his students appeared to suffer from poor mental health, especially low self-esteem. Remember, he's a biology teacher. And the other teacher, what they taught was immaterial, but the other teacher said to them, perhaps you should stop telling them that their presence on earth is just an accident, the product of a series of meaningless, purposeless, random events and variables that came about by chance. You can laugh at that point. If you feel this way, that life is random, empty, and without purpose, John tells us that the reason for everything in existence is the Logos, the Word, Jesus. He is the supreme principle, the eternal reason, the soul of the universe. You've probably seen signs that say Jesus is the reason for the season. Well, Jesus is not just the reason for the season. He's the very reason, with a capital R, for everything. He is behind all of existence. And he is the divine wisdom that sustains and gives meaning to everything. In Jesus, we find meaning for our lives, to our lives. And we also know that God is not some distant, far-off God who doesn't care about us. He's a person, he's a man who comes to us, meeting us where we are, taking on human nature in all of its fullness, yet still being fully God. And since he took on human nature in all its fullness, he knows the struggles and challenges we have. He isn't far off in distance. He has drawn near to us and lived amongst us, perfectly bridging the gap between an infinite God and finite humanity. And through him, this makes it possible for us to know and be reconciled to God. The life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, the Logos, makes it possible for us to have a personal relationship with God. For he's not an impersonal force. He's a person. And in Jesus, fully man and fully God, we see the nature of God revealed to us in the flesh. Later in John's gospel, he writes, to see Jesus is to see God. He is the ultimate revelation of God's love, truth, and grace. He is by his very essence love incarnate, that he would love us so much that while we were far off in our sins, to pay the price for the sin that we can never pay, to take the punishment we all deserve for falling short of our calling as God's representatives on earth. And in this, he brought light to the darkness. He brought meaning and understanding in a world of confusion, brokenness, darkness, and despair. His light brings clarity, hope, and healing. And finally, as the Logos, Jesus is a source of life and meaning. Just as Jesus, the Logos sustains creation, he is the one who gives life to our spirits and purpose to our lives. So, my friends, if darkness at times seems or feels overwhelming, trust in Jesus. Believe in his name. Believe in everything that he is. In him, we will find light and life and rest for our souls. We will find strength to carry on. Jesus said to his disciples, I have come that they, that's you and I, may have life and have it abundantly. Do you live in that light and life? It's yours to grab, this gift. All you need to say is, I believe, and God will do the rest. This is what we celebrate at Christmas. The Word, the Logos, made flesh, who as a baby in Bethlehem brings clarity, purpose, and reconciliation and hope in a chaotic and broken world. As I said before, Jesus isn't just the reason for the season. He is the reason with a capital R for everything. Amen.